We can't see you, we can't hear you, but it's important that you hear this. We've seen the logical outcome of this battle you face. Nobody wins. Nobody. Very little on the second economy gets reported, but every day, a shift in control. Every day, a ransom or theft or damage. Those responsible are lured by profit, principle, or province of a new domain. The scale and frequency of attacks are expanding exponentially. If you have anything resembling value, proprietary data, control of energy, distribution, process, control of anything, then one thing is certain. Adversaries are trying to get their hands on it, to take control, right now. In the second economy, borders are intangible. Kings of new dominions hide behind anonymous avatars. Currency and value are measured in information and access. Time is nonlinear. A rogue packet appears benign, lies dormant for months, years, but activated, initiates a chain of reactions in milliseconds, disrupts your business, destroys reputations. You lose far more than data. You lose trust. This is the single biggest threat to your world, to our world. It's not what you see online on social media or on cable news. It's what you don't see right now in the second economy. Left unchecked, it ruins more than your organization. It damages society. We can't let this happen. There is a solution. You need to listen to what comes next. You have to decide. Are you a 1 or a 0? A yes or a no? Do we stand together or apart? It really is that binary.
Hi. So the idea of this talk is to kind of have a comparison between Black Hat and White Hat. So sometimes I think there tends to be a kind of disconnect between the Black Hat way of thinking and the White Hat way of thinking, even though it's kind of the same umbrella of hacking. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experiences as a Black Hat, 2011, when I was about 15, 16, in a hacking group that many of you will have probably heard of, Lulsec, which was an offshoot of Anonymous.
My name is Sebastian Strobl. I'm working as a principal auditor at Cognosec, located in Vienna, mainly busy with running penetration tests and application security tests. Well, a couple of personal projects, home automation, drone racing, security research when I have time. Just a few words about Cognosec. You might not know the company. We're IT security solutions and services provider. We are specialized in penetration testing and application security. We implement holistic solutions, and we are also providing PCI DSS services.
So a little bit of background about me and how I kind of got into cybersecurity and hacking. When I was about 6 or 7, my dad bought me my first computer, which was this really old Dell Optiplex, I think, with Windows 98 on it. And on the computer was a piece of software installed called Microsoft Front Page. And for those of you that remember, Microsoft Front Page is this really old, discontinued piece of software that used to come by default with all Microsoft Office packages. That basically was a what you see is what you get HTML editor that allows you to create websites. And this was kind of how I first got involved with coding and programming in general. And I would make websites when I was about 8 or 9 and publish them on GeoCities back when that was a thing. And then through that, I kind of learned more advanced coding and programming, like PHP, Python, etc. And my first kind of experience of an actual hack or hacking was, I think, when I was about maybe 11 or 12, and I was doing my maths homework at home, and I didn't have a calculator with me because I needed a calculator to do my homework. So I just searched online for an online calculator, and I found this really poorly designed online calculator on the University of Maryland website, hosted as some Perl script by some professor. And it was basically an input box where you can type in sums and it would give you the result. Now, having some programming knowledge at the time, I kind of thought, what if this program, well, this calculator could potentially have some vulnerabilities, because for those of you that are familiar with programming, the most obvious way that you might create a calculator, and the most vulnerable way is just simply to use the evaluate function, which basically takes in a piece of code and executes it and gives you the result. So this really naive mathematics professor had created this online calculator with the input box where you can just type in sums and it will give you the result, but he also didn't know that you can also type in code into the calculator. So through that, I was able to hack this university website through a vulnerable calculator, which to me was kind of really funny at the time. So I kind of emailed the professor, and he tried to fix the vulnerability. And that was kind of my first experience with cybersecurity and hacking. When I got a little bit older, when I was about maybe 15, 16, I was hanging around on online chat rooms, IRC networks, and I kind of made friends with various people, programmers and hackers. And I got involved with this group called Anonymous, which was kind of doing these online protests against people who attacked WikiLeaks or threatened freedom of information. And through that, I co-founded a hacking group called LulzSec, which was an offshoot of Anonymous, with 5 other people that I had met and trusted. And LulzSec was like this really short-lived thing that lasted for 50 days that made a lot more headlines than we kind of expected. And the idea of LulzSec was kind of, well, we thought that we saw a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of high-profile websites, but in most cases, when we actually report these vulnerabilities, most of the companies didn't really seem to care or pay attention. So the idea of LulzSec was kind of just to expose how security is poor on the internet. Because throughout the past few decades, the information security community has kind of always warned companies about how many low-hanging fruits there are in their software, but they would never kind of listen about it. It was kind of the elephant in the room. And LulzSec was kind of set out to expose that. So we hacked into a whole bunch of companies and governmental organizations, including Sony, which was one of the more high-profile ones, and also including FBI affiliate InfoGuard, and also the Arizona Police Department. And for some reason, people kind of really loved to see this. Like it was kind of really unexpected, because this was kind of like black hat behavior. We were just exposing companies' databases on the internet. But for some reason, people just kind of followed this on Twitter the same way they kind of follow the hashtag of a release of a new movie. To them, it was kind of entertaining for some reason. And at some point, we were trending more than One Direction, which was like a popular boy band in the UK. And Patrick Gray, which is a information security blogger, wrote this article called "Why We Secretly Love LulzSec," and that kind of goes to the point of, well, we were kind of exposing the elephant in the room. And for some reason, people even dressed up as LulzSec for Halloween. And people were pretending they were hacked by LulzSec just to sort of jump on the attention bandwagon. A few case studies of some of the organizations that we compromised. So Sony is one of the is a great case study for companies. Sony was actually hacked 21 times in 1 year in 2011. And that was just after they laid off the entire security team. And to me, Sony is a great example of how you don't do security, because they just kind of had hundreds of different websites on the network. And the vast majority of them were vulnerable to really simple vulnerabilities like SQL injection or remote file inclusion. And this was like a really, large Fortune 500 company that had billions of dollars to spend on security. But the board didn't really see that as a priority, so that kind of cost them a lot of reputational damage. Two of these attacks were actually through insider attacks. So the PlayStation Network hack, where 80 million accounts were compromised that we heard about in 2011, which really made headlines for months, was actually an insider who sort of planted some information within their servers to make it look like they got hacked, to kind of teach Sony a lesson for laying off their entire security team. So this kind of goes to show that insider threats are a really big deal as well. HB Gary Federal is also a great example. So HB Gary Federal is a US defense contractor in 2011, and the CEO kind of had this press release in the Financial Times claiming that he had de-anonymized the leaders of Anonymous, this hacking group. And he kind of thought that the worst that would happen in retaliation was a distributed denial of service attack. Because you would kind of expect that if you're attacking hackers, you would expect some retaliation. But he just thought the worst that would happen, his website would be taken down. But the next day, it turns out that their website, and this was a security company, their website had a very basic SQL injection vulnerability in it. And not only that, the CEO used a very simple password that he reused everywhere. So he used the same password on his World of Warcraft account as his email accounts and his company accounts. And as a result, the CEO resigned and the company lost millions of dollars worth of contracts. And this, to me, is a great example of how hacks could damage your company, even if it's not directly through customer loss. It could have massive reputational damage. And as a result of this, it was also revealed that they were up to some dodgy activities, such as blackmailing American journalists who supported WikiLeaks. And as a result, Congress actually opened an investigation into them for their activities. Great case study is the Arizona Department of the Arizona Department of Public Safety, which is basically the police department. And what we kind of realized throughout our time was that the government seemed to kind of be behind the curve in terms of security compared to the industry. So this was a police department, and they were simply hacked through a webmail interface because one of the police officers used the password 123456. And these are the people that are supposed to be protecting us. So even if they're not secure, then who can we really rely on? I think if there's a few things that I've learned is that a lot of these attacks that we hear about with APTs, etc., are kind of really overhyped. I mean, we heard about the FBI accusing North Korea of hacking Sony Pictures in 2013, but I think that's highly unlikely given how many vulnerabilities Sony had and how many insiders they had. And what we kind of noticed as well is that the larger the organization was that it was easier to attack, because the more systems you have, the bigger your attack vector. That's why Sony was kind of really easy to hack, and Sony was such a common target among hackers. It was kind of seen as like the game of the year among hackers. Let's see who can hack Sony the most. And the PR damage that came out of that was so huge that lots of companies after that said that we don't want to be another Sony, and started actually investing more in cybersecurity. So some companies that I'm aware of had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of new contracts simply because of this PR damage that Sony had experienced. A lot of other companies said we don't want to be another Sony. APTs, we hear a lot about them, but even the NSA, for example, if you've seen the recent shadow broker leaks, the most common way that they hacked into these Chinese firewalls were through really simple CGI exploits, really low-hanging fruits that we think the APTs are advanced and using lead 0 days, but in reality they just have a little bit more time and resources than the average person. And I think the most important point to me is that the main problem in information security, in my opinion, isn't that there isn't enough technology or resources to invest in information security. It's more of an incentive problem. Many companies don't have or see the incentive in investing in security. And so for example, one great example is Yahoo, who was compromised in 2015. All of their accounts were compromised in 2015, and the security team wanted to alert their customers that they were compromised, but the CEO vetoed that and said that we shouldn't reveal to our customers that we have been compromised, because that would be a massive PR disaster for them. So to me, that kind of really goes to show that for many companies, cybersecurity is only an issue when it becomes a public relations issue, a PR disaster, and that's for good reason as well. But I think to kind of make this little bit easier to handle, I think we need to think of ways to make companies more transparent about their cybersecurity practices. Because if companies are more transparent about cybersecurity practices, then, for example, if they're forced to reveal when they've been compromised or what kind of cybersecurity techniques they're using to prevent attacks, then customers will be able to make a much better informed decision about which services to use, and companies will be more likely to invest in cybersecurity to avoid that PR issue.
Good. So we've heard about hacks that happened in the past, carried out by hacker groups like LulzSec or Anonymous. Now we're on the other side, and I will be talking about how to protect against these threats. Some of the things you will hear now are quite obvious, but I think sometimes it is not complicated at this level. We'll just need to make sure that certain things are cared about. I will talk about what not to do and what we can do. So, first of all, we've seen a lot of cases where companies think they just buy a solution, a tool, a software, plug it in, and it will basically protect all the assets. In reality, and most of us know that, I think we just need to get it up to the people that decide on budget and resource to make sure they really understand that it's not like you buy a software license and then you're secure. No, it is much different. The ratio between people operating the software, maintaining the software, maintaining the toolset or the process or whatever you may call it, and the tool itself is very important, I think. We've seen tools that were idling for years. People didn't even look at the SIEM interface. They were like, when we looked back in time in the history, we've seen attacks happening all the time, but nobody looked at the logs. So this was just a waste of money. So what else do we have on the list? Everybody is responsible for security. And yes, on one side, everybody should be responsible, accountable for their own little security world, I would say. Like your own passwords, yes, okay, I understand that. But saying, well, we have different teams in the organization, and we'll just say everybody needs to take care of security and not assigning responsibility, not assigning accountability. This is a real problem. Because in the end, everybody will say, well, we thought the other department, the other team, the other guy would take care of the security, of the environment, of the system, of the application, whatever we're talking about. Next point in the list, and I think, okay, that's one of the security principles. You've heard that 100 times, but we still see companies that think that, well, if it is not visible outside of the organization, nobody will know about it. For example, we have application APIs that are reachable via internet, and they don't have any measures for authentication. So you can basically, well, you don't need to log in or anything. You just, if you know what the interface looks like and where to find it, then you can just fetch all information you need or manipulate data the way you want. And nowadays, I thought, well, this happened maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Nowadays, we still see that happening, and companies that are in business for a long time have those exposed APIs everywhere. Some of them even don't know about it, or people know about it and say, yeah, we knew about it. We have that 5 years. We told the guys we need to reconstruct, we need to rebuild, but we didn't get time to do it. So next thing on the list, rely on third parties only. And that's somehow links to responsibility or accountability. You always need some guy, and that's my personal opinion, but I've seen a couple of times where this went wrong. You need somebody in the company, in the organization that is responsible for security and acts like an umbrella, even for third-party services like managed SIEM, managed services, whatever you have, vulnerability scanning, all that. If it's just done by third parties, you're basically giving away your control, and sometimes this is a bad thing. And yeah, trust your security providers. I don't say don't trust them, but at a certain manage, you still need to manage them too. Good. Another thing, well, we are running penetration tests, and from time to time, we have a module for social engineering, and then one of the tasks is we send out phishing emails to the client's employees. So you would say that, well, we have security awareness training, and we're training our administrators to basically not click the link, not enter the credentials on the website, or, well, not open an executable that is attached to the file. And what we've done is we basically segment those phishing emails, say, okay, we target 20 people in IT, 20 people in marketing, 20 people in finance, 20 people in accounting. And what we've seen is that, well, yes, they're doing awareness training, and IT people are aware that they shouldn't click a link, but you send the email to marketing and 50% of the people basically click that link and enter their credentials. I'm not saying marketing are not security aware, I'm just saying sometimes the people in certain departments are left out and they are not taken into account. And because they are not IT admin, you might think that, okay, well, there's nothing to protect there because what can happen is people can just read their email. We don't care about that. In reality, it's really different. Most of the accounts that we find that way will allow us to log in via VPN, have access to the network, and so on. So train all your employees. Don't, like, even CEO, assistants of the CEO, everybody, and don't leave out people just because they're not IT. Next thing is having or only partially having technical controls in place for certain things. Password complexity is a good example. We have a password policy that says 12 characters, numbers, and special characters need to be in the password. That's our policy. Everybody needs to follow it. Everybody needs to sign it. But when you look at the employees' passwords, they'll have passwords like you just mentioned. Like, I'm pretty sure they had a policy saying they have to have complex passwords. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the FBI, some of the FBI passwords were directly breaking the FBI handbook about security.
Yeah, so they had a policy set up, great, yeah. But nobody really thought about, well, really following the policy. They were like, okay, well, I don't want to remember a long password, I'll just choose a simple one. So have a technical control in place, set up your policy to not allow simple passwords, and not only on email, on all applications, even internal applications, because we most of the time find a way into the network, and the next step is to basically spread through the network and then extract data. So we look at internal applications. So people will, from the outside, they will say, okay, well, we have a VPN password that is very long, very complex. We have a second factor token, so people will not be able to get in. When we get in, we see that the internal applications most of the times don't follow the same policies, or they don't have the technical control in place. So you can just use you can basically brute force it very easily because they only use 6 character passwords there. Good. Now I have a couple of examples. It's just samples, random samples, because I thought about what people currently or sometimes rely on. They think it makes them 100% secure. First of all, perimeter security only. So we have an external firewall that protects all your assets. Well, I've heard that has been mentioned in talks earlier already. No, perimeter security is just one layer of security. You need to also make sure that if somebody, well, crosses the border or gets through the firewall or is able to hack a service that is exposed, then he is in the network and then he can spread wherever he wants. So you have to have certain other controls that I will mention later. The other thing is malware protection, and we're talking these days a lot about malware and malware threats, ransomware and stuff. Signature-based detection on the network or in a file system in files. Yes, it's a nice thing to have, and you need to have it in place, but that's just the basis. If you rely on that to work and rely on that don't have any other measures, like for example behavioral analysis or any way to detect anomalies in the network, that's a problem. Because we've seen that targeted attacks, they always use malware that is not detected by a scanner. If we create a malware, for example, no, it's not really a malware, it's basically just a program that opens a reverse shell to our own server, then we use a program for obfuscation. So we have a payload, we obfuscate a payload, and then we send it to everybody in the company, and it will not be detected by the scanner because the scanner looks for the signature of a known virus, which our program doesn't have because it's not known yet. Good. One-factor authentication, yeah, two-factor, multi-factor, whatever you want to call it. I think for administrative functions is very important. So if you're still using root accounts and only passwords for your admin accounts, Please stop doing that. That's really a big problem. If one of the admin's computers are infected, and we've heard stories about, well, we've seen it in the news, of admins' private computers and computers being infected by malware, the attacker basically has the password. So it is not, the password itself is not protection anymore. So you need this second factor. You can use a token, you can use biometrics, whatever, but please, for admin functions, always implement a second factor. Okay, the technical controls, I think we had that. So a couple of things on what works to prevent those things from happening. Assign responsibility within the company. If you don't have a security responsible in the company, and you don't have people knowing that they are responsible for security, it will not work. Ideally, you have you have a job description, and if you want somebody to take accountability of a security function, then it has to be in his description of the position. Well, we have seen cases where they say, well, we have development teams, and they're taking care of development security. And the development team, if you ask them, they say, well, we are developing, and we're trying to make it secure as much as we can, but we have to deliver function. That's a problem, because business will be, the most pressure will be on function and not on security. You mentioned earlier that there's no incentive for that, and I agree. And if you don't put it into the positions, if you don't put it into the descriptions, if you don't have it structured properly, it will not work, because people will always say, well, I didn't know about it if things go wrong. There's only very few people that take this responsibility and basically hold on to it and say, well, I'm gonna do it the proper way. Second one, quite obvious, but still we see a lot of things or systems that are not using security faults. And when I mean security faults, I mean things like system hardening. You have a build of a system that is hardened, and you only use that build and nothing else. Well, we've seen cases where they have something like that, but whenever they set up a new function or a new service or a new application, they don't use the same standard, and somebody in the team just sets it up because it needs to be quick, it needs to be fast, and they don't use the standard. So have a standard in place for hardening, for basically, it can be called security faults. It can be hardening, it can also be your password complexity standards. Least privilege is another principle. It's a known security principle, but I think we've seen a lot of cases where people in development had admin access for production service. Yeah. Why do they need it? Because they need to debug if something goes wrong. Maybe yes. Ideally, you have a test environment to do that. But most of the cases we've seen is like, really, they have database access. A lot of developers have production server access. And when you review access rights, you'll find out that least privilege is most of the time not working out. Couple of more points here, but I think one of the really important points is, and I think that has been said in a lot of other talks, just keep in mind, somebody will be hacking you. And I'm not saying they will basically hack your application or something, because maybe you have a really great security application. They might just be hacking one of your employees, and then they are in the system. So just have that in mind, and then think about it. If they're in the network, how can we protect our assets? You wouldn't, for example, say, well, I have a large fence around my house, but when somebody basically jumps over the fence, all my valuables are lying around in the house. You will have a safe, right? If there's a threat outside your house. So same thing I would count for networks or systems. If you don't have a layered security approach, you don't use a DMZ or segmented networks, and if you don't have a proper protection of the data, like encryption for sensitive data, then it will be very easy to exfiltrate your important data or to manipulate data and to basically get to your assets. I think we talked about security training. Last point on my slide, and that's more or less a personal view on things, is a lot of companies think they don't need penetration testing because they're securing everything, but it's nonsense, because you would always, if you, for example, have a car, you expect the car to be tested properly. Even if they build it properly, you have crash tests that test the car's security, safety in this case. For IT systems or software, you have testing teams that test the functionality to make sure there's no bug, no functional bug in the software. Why don't we run security tests. I've seen a lot of cases where people think we don't need security tests. Security tests, in my opinion, very important. Vulnerability scans, more regular, penetration tests maybe annually and after large changes. So I think we're running out of time here. So I have just a couple of words on why I think as a WhiteHat or penetration tester, my life is harder than the hacker's life. Some of them are on the slides. The most important thing for me is time. We have a very narrow time frame because people want results. Most of our penetration tests are done within 2 weeks. You look at the attackers. I mean, first of all, they are grabbing the low-hanging fruit, yes, but if it's targeted, they don't have 2 weeks. They are working months on one project. So that's why giving the penetration tester information about the system, about the landscape, and allowing some gray or white box testing is very important, I think. The black box penetration test is mostly useless in that time frame, in my opinion. And, well, information, yes, we talked about that time. Last slide from my side, because I think we have half a minute to talk. Why do we need penetration testing? And I mentioned some of that already. But we see it every time we run a penetration test for a company that hasn't run a test before and didn't run vulnerability scans. These bugs, these security problems, they sometimes remain in systems for very long. We've seen cases where large companies, organizations have web shells on their systems for years. They don't realize that. People are in their network because the server is not every time in the DM set. Sometimes server sits in the internal network, is nutted through to the internet, and now you have a web shell on the server, on the public port, and everybody can access basically this server's data. Yeah, why didn't they find out? Because they didn't run a vulnerability scan for the server, because they had critical assets and they ran the scan for all the critical assets, but they didn't think about a lot of other assets. So be aware of your infrastructure. I think if you have a CMDB and you manage your assets and everybody works with this, you're fine. And run vulnerability scans, test your infrastructure, test your applications, especially applications, because infrastructure, well, if you patch your systems, if you have security faults, will be fine. But the application, especially custom applications, are a very common attack vector. As you mentioned, SQL injection, a lot of times. We still see SQL injection. It's a very old thing. It's still there. Good. Time is out, I think. Do we have time for some questions?
We can take a quick question or two.
Okay. Yeah. Question, anybody?
Any questions on the floor? Oh, can't see anything.
Don't be shy.
No?
Yeah, we have one here.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for an interesting and insightful presentation. My question goes out to you, Mustafa. I'd like to know, during your hacking days, was there at any point where you had difficulty in hacking through a specific system, and what were some of the reasons?
It's a good question. We didn't hack into every system that we could, and I think the sole reason for that is because it depends on how big the organization is. The bigger the organization, the easier it is to hack. If we're trying to target a really small organization with maybe like just one WordPress installation or like one little server, the attack vector is quite small. So it becomes quite harder to hack. So that's the only reason why we couldn't hack a company, because it was smaller than other companies, so the attack vector was lower. I'll give you a really good example. So one of the companies that we hacked was one of the organizations that we hacked was the Westboro Baptist Church, which was this really controversial church in America, which kind of like is notorious for kind of like protesting at the funerals of dead soldiers. And they were actually this little church was actually much harder to hack than Sony was. Sony, we could simply hack them through some simple SQL injections. But for Westboro Baptist Church, I actually had to spend a lot more time on that to kind of find 0 days in the software that they used. And I had to spend a few days trying to actually use it to find a 0 day in the software that they use in order to compromise them. So I had to use a 0 day simply to hack a church, as opposed to Sony, I had to use a simple SQL injection.
All right. Yep. Okay, we're going to have to leave it at that, I'm afraid. If you do have any more questions, please find the speakers during lunch. and I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you. Mustafa Al-Bassam and Sebastian Strobl from Cognosec, thank you very much.
Thanks.